Hello. It's been a while. How are you? How was your summer? Good. Great. We've got good, we've got great. How was your summer? It was okay. That's right. That runs the whole spell. At least no one had a bad summer. I had a really good summer. I've just come back from break. But Milo might remember, I don't know if the other two were here, but we did a story in June about my favorite animal. You remember? Pandas, that's right. Well, this is about an animal that I didn't really like. Alligators. I was really scared of alligators. And they can be really scary creatures, especially in the wild. But I actually went to, have you ever been to the Academy of Sciences up in Golden Gate Park? Have you seen the alligator there? Yeah.
I know his name.
What's his name?
Claude.
It is Claude.
I read that story.
You've read that book? Well,
It's a real one.
it's a real one. But this is a special alligator. So this is the book for today. It's about an alligator called Claude, who he saw him. He's really cute, isn't he? He changed my whole opinion of alligators, because I was always kind of scared and didn't really like them. And then I met Claude, and I really like Claude. So sometimes when you meet someone or something that you thought you were scared of, and you meet them and you go, they're actually kind of cute. And this is the story of Claude, and this is a book called Claude that you can get at the Academy of Science.
I saw the author in person.
Oh, you saw the author, did you? Oh.
But I didn't get to meet him.
Oh, you didn't get to meet them. I haven't met the author. I got to meet Claude, though. That was fun. So this is the story of Claude. He went to your school. That's great. Well, you'll know this story, so you can help me out when I get this wrong, okay? So in the Louisiana swamp, a baby alligator cracked out of its shell. Like many of his sisters and brothers, he was about the size of a banana. Did you know alligators are about the size of a banana when they're born? And like them, he had a long tail and scaly skin, and like them, he was quite cute. But unlike his siblings, this little alligator was not green, he was white. He was an albino alligator. You can see how he's different. And you think, oh, that's kind of cool, he's just a different color. But there's problems. He was different from the other alligators, very different. And the swamp, different can be dangerous. He did not blend into his surroundings, so he couldn't hide from hungry herons and raccoons. So it was kind of dangerous being a white alligator. His pink eyes didn't let him see very well. So when he got older, he wouldn't be able to find food for him to eat. And the pale skin would get very badly burnt in the sun. Sometimes we forget that animals can get sunburned like we do as well. And when you're an albino alligator, that could be really painful. Worst of all, different made the other alligators uneasy. The baby alligator was in danger. Poor Claude. The man who ran the alligator farm was worried. This little guy needs protection, he thought. So he gave him to a special zoo in Florida that raised and cared for alligators and other animals. The zookeepers named him Claude to protect him, and they put him in a pen all by himself. He was safe for now, but all alone. Claude lived alone for about 13 years, until one day biologists at a museum in faraway California heard about him. They were excited. A white alligator? How different. How wonderful. They wanted Claude to come down to the museum, and they had the perfect place for him. The biologists also asked the zoo for a second alligator. Claude had been alone all his life. They hoped that in this new home, things could be different. Maybe the other alligator, Bonnie, would accept Claude. Maybe they'd even become friends. So Claude, who was by then 8 feet long, that's even bigger than me. That's a big alligator. The biggest person in the world is 8 foot 11 inches. Wow, I feel tiny now. That's really tall. That's even bigger than Claude. And it took him a 2,000-mile journey all the way from Florida to California. A professional wildlife animal handler drove both alligators all the way across the United States to the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. When they arrived, a crowd of museum staffers were waiting to welcome them. When the handler let Claude out of his crate, smiles and cheers spread throughout the audience. A special team of biologists gave both alligators a physical exam to make sure they were okay after the long trip. They were in great shape. Then the biologists moved the alligators back into their crates and lowered them into the museum's swamp habitat. It's a cool habitat they have. Have you seen the habitat? The crowd watched anxiously. Would Claude like his new home? Would he and Bonnie get along? Claude explored his new swamp. It was warm. It had plants and trees and a fancy heated island. Over the next few months, Bonnie and Claude shared the swamp. They swam together, they ate together, they even shared the heated island. Bonnie doesn't look very happy. But Bonnie didn't like Claude. She didn't like how he bumped into her because he had poor eyesight. She didn't like how he bumped into her. So one day she bit them on the foot hard. Ow. Poor Claude. The biologist hoisted him out the swamp. Then they operated and removed his pinky toe. Claude took 2 weeks to recover. When he returned to the swamp, Bonnie was gone. The biologist had sent her back to Florida. Once again, Claude was all alone. Or was he? In all the stress of sharing the swamp with Bonnie, Claude had hardly noticed the other swamp mates. He ate 5 enormous snapping turtles: Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, Mola, and Jaws. They were rescue animals too. They had been saved from the illegal turtle trade 40 years before Claude arrived in San Francisco. Would they attack Claude? Would he attack them? What happened next was a surprise to everyone. They became friends. After all, they enjoyed the same things like good food, a new toy, and bath time. Turtles being cleaned by fish, and Claude getting his monthly shower and massage. How do you massage an alligator? That I would like to see. Sometimes they squabbled. Put the chalice on Claude. I'd like you to do that. Okay, Milo? Sometimes they squabbled, as friends do. Once Leonardo decided to check out Claude's fancy heated island. Claude was annoyed. He sat on Leonardo. But eventually they worked it out. The turtles didn't mind that Claude was different from other alligators. They were turtles after all. For the first time in his life, Claude had buddies. Claude made other friends, and people from all around the world came to San Francisco to meet him. A white alligator? How different, how wonderful, they thought. His fans drew pictures of him and wrote him letters. They bought stuffed white alligators at the museum shop to take home and cuddle. And one of our Christmas ornaments in my house is an of Claude. He's on our Christmas tree at Christmas time. And on his hatch day, they threw him a huge party. Claude was a celebrity. He was an ambassador for science. Visitors learned about how habitat destruction is hurting wildlife. They learned about camouflage and animal behavior and the genetic code that makes each creature unique, including Claude. They learned that there are hardly any albino alligators in the whole world, probably fewer than 30. Claude was no longer alone now. Now he had friends by the thousands. The lonely outcast alligator had become the most loved alligator in the world. There's only about 60 leopards in the world. That's really sad too. Thank you for sharing that, Milo. Claude was still different, very different, but in the swamp, different was wonderful. So thank you so much for listening. So if you ever get the chance, go up to the Academy of Sciences, and maybe we'll arrange a trip up there for the all-ages activity. I'm looking at you, Peter Hart. We'll maybe do a family all-ages activity up there, and we can see Claude. So thank you for listening. It's time for your religious education classes now. Thank you. I invite you now to join me in the spirit of meditation and reflection. This is a Universalist meditation written by Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. And it incorporates breathing as well as spoken word. So I'll try and guide you in the first part in the breathing, and then hopefully you'll pick it up for the rest. So breathing in, deep breath. There is a love. Breathe out. Holding each of us. Breathing in. There is a love. Breathing out. Holding all of us. Breathing in. There is a love. Breathing out. Holding all we love. There is a love. Holding all. We rest in this love. Hold all who anger me in this love. Hold all who disagree with me in this love. Hold all who have wronged me in this love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. Hold all who I have angered in this love. Hold all who I disagree with in this love. Hold all who I have wronged in this love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. hold all those people and places in the embrace of love's presence, mystery, and transforming power. I invite you to join me in silence.
I recently read the book Love at the Center, Unitarian Universalist Theologies, edited by UUA President Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. The book is an anthology of 26 essays by Unitarian Universalist ministers and laypeople, answering the question of what it means to put love at the center of our faith. It contains personal testimony to love's power, reminders of the centrality of love throughout the long histories of Universalism and Unitarianism, and theologies of love drawn from many different expressions of UUism. This morning, I'd like to summarize for you the essay in the book that was the most meaningful to me. The essay is titled, "There is a Love Holding Us," and was written by Reverend Sherry Prudhomme. I need to warn you that this essay focuses heavily on mental health struggles of a teenager, including suicidal ideation. If you have personal experience with such issues, please consider how you may experience hearing this and whether it could be helpful for you. I don't want anyone to be shocked by hearing about this without warning. Reverend Prudhomme starts by saying that the new Article 2 that places love at the center gives Unitarian Universalists an opportunity for theological reflection, and that such reflection becomes a necessity when one's long-held traditional beliefs about love, for example, prove to be inadequate in the face of a profoundly difficult circumstance. Reverend Prudhomme had always understood love as something generated within and among living beings, as an emotion, an orientation of the heart, or a description of actions or behaviors. She understood that a sense of a larger love preached by Universalists who proclaimed God is love was a defining aspect of UU heritage, but this had remained outside of her experience. Her essay describes a transformation in which she released an understanding of love generated solely from within or among living beings to one that involves surrender, mystery, and faith in a love beyond any of us. Her story starts as follows. There is nothing quite like one's child becoming suicidal to bring a parent face to face with the limitations of love between human beings. Her teenage son's suicidal ideation caused something foundational in her worldview to come undone. She knew her son was well loved and had believed that the love of family and community was sufficient to create the conditions for children to grow and flourish. It took her a long time to acknowledge the truth that while her love was somewhat protective, it was ultimately powerless over the mental health challenges facing her son. She also encountered what she described as distortions of human love. Some behaviors, rooted in love but filtered up through layers of our flawed human complexities, can come out as something that doesn't resemble love much at all. Her love for her son was sometimes clouded by fear of losing him. Sometimes her fear and sense of powerlessness morphed into anger. Sometimes her desire for her son to do the things he needed to do to claw his way out of the deep hole of depression brought out desperation and frustration when he didn't do those things. Facing so intimately the limitations and distortions of human love, Reverend Prudhomme began to reckon with the wobbly foundation of her prior understanding of love. As she and her son traveled through the ensuing years of his struggle with depression, she found herself turning increasingly to a sense of love beyond either of them, their family, or their community. She returned to the writings of the Universalists and their sense of a love that does not let us go, ever. A love that former president of Starr King School for the Ministry, Rebecca Parker, and the author of the meditation that we just did, what she called the great love that holds us all. It was into the arms of this love that Reverend Prudhomme fell awash in grief when she fully accepted that if her child truly wanted to kill himself, she wouldn't be able to stop him. She let herself rest in this love as she traversed the emotional landscape of parenting a child in the midst of a mental health crisis. And it was to this love that she handed over her child to be held as he wrestled with demons, both inner and outer, and struggled to find the will to take hold of his life and live it. While this love didn't heal what was broken, she found that being held in this love allows her greater capacity to be with what actually is in life, creating conditions in which healing is more likely to happen. Later in her chapter, Reverend Prudhomme shared that her son eventually found his way out of the grips of the desire to not be alive anymore. She wrote that she's not sure how she would have made it through this and other challenges with her soul intact without leaning into and receiving love from a source beyond all naming. She shared extensively how her theological perspective and spiritual practices have constellated around this larger love, including music, meditation, the natural world, and put simply, the assertion that God is love. She ends with this: "It is my hope that our religious communities will become more practiced at offering the kinds of adult faith development and mutual support that will encourage growth in our spiritual lives, including our abilities to experience being held and nourished by love within, among, and beyond ourselves."
Look at the back of our order of service. Under love, it says, "Love is the power that holds us and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love." Well, as most of you know, I've been on vacation for the last 6 weeks or 4 weeks, and I got thinking, well, we heard so much about love at the center during our General Assembly at June, which some of us attended, and I really had to think about it. Really? What does that mean? What does love mean? And what does it mean to put love at the center of our shared values? So being typically Unitarian Universalists, I had to start critiquing it. And I thought, well, what else could we do other than love? And I thought, well, what about fear, anger, sadness, worry, jealousy, joy? And I thought about each of those because when I really look at where most of my emotions are a lot of the time, at this time in our history, fear, anger, disappointment, confusion, worry. Joy struggles to make it in there. But I realize each of those are something individual. And fundamental to Unitarian Universalism is we are relational. We put relationship at the center of who we are as a faith. Relationships with ourselves, relationships with one another, and relationships with the wider planet. So if we are grounding ourselves in relationships, what type of relationship do we want? And it doesn't seem like a far stretch to say a loving relationship. And in the reflection that Barbie just gave about Reverend Sherry Prudhomme, the love she had for her son was strong. I know Sherry quite well, actually, and I know how much she loves her son. And she realized that that mother's love that she had was not enough. And I just imagine as a parent, I mean, I'm a parent, but I've never been in that dark place that Sherry must have been in. And I think of the courage it took. And we tend not to think of courage and love as connected, but it's really courageous to really love the world as it is. Not how we wish it to be, but loving the world as it is. Loving the situation where your teenage son has got suicide ideations. And she had that courage to surrender to that. I'm not sure I would have. But she had the courage there. Did it change the outcome? We will never know. But it takes a profound courage to surrender. And many religious traditions have that. If you look at the fundamental aspect of Islam, it's this idea of surrender. Surrender to the will of God, to surrender to the power of God. And doesn't necessarily work for many of us in Unitarian Universalism. But as I mentioned before, we put relationship there, so the love towards one another, the love towards oneself, and the love of the universe, the planet that we live in. And I know as Unitarian Universalists, a lot of us want this definition of love. I want a definition of love. And of course, it's so easy. It's such an overloaded word in the English language that we can get into the Hollywood romantic love or sexual love. But we're talking about something different when we're talking about love in a religious setting. We're talking about Martin Luther King's idea of agape love, which he says is a sort of love that makes no distinction between a friend and enemy. It's an overflowing of love that is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. The love of God operating in the human heart. The love of God operating in the human heart. And as I mentioned, we can be somewhat critical, and they said, yes, but what if I don't believe in God? And I'm going to invite us all to try and find, it's good to bring a critical lens to religion, but find some way in to a life-affirming faith. What definition of God would be meaningful to you? God as love? This benevolent force in the world that cares for us, that Reverend Sherry talked about? How can we find a way in to definitions that maybe have been a problem in the past? How can we find a way into something that's life-affirming, life-enhancing, and perhaps even life-saving, as it may have been in the case of Reverend Sherry's son? There's also another definition of love I've used from the pulpit here before that I still find helpful. And it comes from the great African-American author James Baldwin. He says, the longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether friendship, family, or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. Love is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. And I have a profound example of that happened at the San Francisco religious community. And I think rather than definition of love, I think having stories of love that demonstrate love in action is perhaps more powerful, especially for Unitarian Universalists. And this goes back 21 years ago. It was a young man came to the congregation. His name was Nathan, and he was about 27 at the time, 26. And he came, and I was the first person he met. And I was chatting away to him. We had a good conversation, and I must have been quiet on my best behavior because he actually came back the following week. And Nathan really became part of the community, and he was smart, he was articulate, he was really engaging, he really loved the community. And in time, I found out he was a transgender man. But he'd been rejected by his family when he transitioned. And Nathan became a deeply loved member of our community. And I remember at one point I asked him, on behalf of our worship committee, would he be willing to be a worship associate like Barbie is for us here? And he looked at me, and at first he was kind of startled, and then he started to cry. Of course, I'm thinking, what did I say? That was not the response I was expecting. And he said, I said, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong? He said, no. He said, are you asking me because I'm transgender? And I said, no. He said, do you think the congregation would be willing to have a transgender worship associate? This was 21 years ago. And I said, I'm asking you for an alternative reason than that. I'm asking you because you're 27 and you'll be the youngest worship associate. I'm 42, and I'm the youngest worship associate right now. And he just cried more and more. And he said, that's what I love about this community. They see me for the full human being I am. Sometimes I really need to be reminded of my own humanity. I thought that was really powerful. I mean, this idea, we often play these identity games, but we have to see people beyond their identity, but not ignore people's identity. And Nathan became a fabulous worship associate. I'd love to say the story had a happy ending. But as I said, you have to love the world as it is and not love the world as we'd want it to be. Nathan was a worship associate. He was due to give the worship reflection the next Sunday, and I was in my office and I got a phone call from the minister, Reverend John Robertson, to say that Nathan had been killed in a car accident. I was up at Millbury in 101. And John asked me if I'd be willing to be one of the worship associates to read the reflection that Nathan had written. Of course I was, amongst others, and we all gathered, and we'd announced it to people, but people still arrived at the service at the San Francisco church not knowing it, that Nathan had passed. We announced at the beginning of the service, then we read his reflection. It was so full of hope and so powerful and so life-affirming, and how much the community had helped him out of a very dark place. He'd even 2 weeks previously reconciled with his mother, who they had not spoken for a number of years. And it was so powerful. And I even remember one of the lines I read. He says, I'm a cross-eyed transgender doc, but I know God loves me. I'm a cross-eyed transgender doc, but I know God loves me. And he felt that love from our community. And that Sunday at that service, I think we all felt a love that was beyond that community. It's a love that Reverend Sherry talks about that came from outside of that place, that brought comfort, even amidst the tears, even amidst the laughter, even amidst the anger at what had happened. But then I went home, and my anger got stirred again. I told you anger is one of my emotions. I try to replace it with love, but sometimes it's anger. And it was when I read the obituary, and I reread it again yesterday. And the obituary was about Nathan and it said at the end, the coroner identified Nathan as a woman. As long as I had known him, as long as our community had known him, he was a man. He identified, he honored himself as a man. And I remember being so angry, not at the coroner was doing their job, but why did they have to report that in the newspaper? That was not how he identified himself. And at that point, I made a pledge that I was always going to be strong in supporting transgender community. And you know what's happening in Texas right now towards the transgender community is shameful. And it's happening in too many places in our country. And that does make me angry. But we have to acknowledge that anger, move beyond it to love, and hold that community in love, and hold that community with righteous love to overcome the anger that I think many of us feel. Martin Luther King says that power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is correcting everything that stands against love. We have to find that love within ourselves and for ourselves, that love between our community, and spread that to the wider community. And that love that Reverend Sherry talked about that comes from beyond that we may not understand. And at times of grief, I think many of us lean into that love that we feel that we do not understand. I remember finding out my father died at Amsterdam Airport, and I've talked about this, and I felt a love when I went to that chapel, when I was all by myself in the hustle and bustle of a major airport. I found I was held in love that to this day I do not understand. And as Unitarian Universalists, I think we need to be open to that love. We need those spiritual practices that help us open ourselves to that love. And we don't need to understand where it comes from. We just have to recognize it when it's telling us you're loved and there's nothing you can do about it. You are loved and there's nothing you can do about it. That is one of the most powerful messages that our Universalist tradition says. Universalism challenged the Christian orthodoxy of the time of saying that God was judgmental, saying no, God was loving, and we all would be saved. There would be no separation. And moving that God from a judgmental God to a loving God is fundamental. We cannot let that go from our tradition. So putting love at the center is bringing the divine, the sacred God of our understanding back to that center. And the Episcopal priest Carter Hayward says this: we are not automatic lovers of self, others, world, or God. Love does not just happen. We are not love machines, puppet in the string of a deity called love. Love is a choice. Love is a choice. Not simply or necessarily a rational choice, but rather a willingness to be present to others without pretense or guile. Love is a conversion to humanity. A willingness to participate with others in the healing of a broken world and broken lives. Love is a choice to experience life as a member of the human family. So love is a choice. Do we choose to put love at the center of who we are? Do we choose to put love at the center of our human values? Not that we need to understand the source, whether it's from within, from community, from outside of our understanding. Do we choose to put that love at the center? I hope so, because if we truly put relationships at the center of that, our religion, what type of relationship? And the only relationship I want at the center of my faith is a loving one.